So I am super excited to have this conversation. It's been a number of weeks in the making. It was actually Elliot's brainchild, so I have to give him credit for that. But we're going to have a unique conversation today and really just hit some controversial topics in the industry and talk through where we think things are going and what's happening and bat around some ideas. But before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, Elliot, and then we'll do you, John.
Outstanding. So Elliot Vigil. I would love to say that I've become accidentally an influencer. It wasn't intentional. Everybody knows about 18 months ago, United Rentals bought Ahern Equipment, who I'd worked for a number of years.
I'd heard that.
Yeah, it was a small change in the industry. Like something happened, and all of a sudden I realized as that acquisition happened, I wasn't part of the transition, which was okay. I mean, everything happens for a reason. And therapeutically, because I love helping people, I love training sales reps, I love the industry, I started putting out LinkedIn and YouTube videos just discussing things I've learned in the industry, and all of a sudden I built a 10,000 plus following. And I think you and I, when we talked at the Con Expo, like my third video I ever put out got 100,000 views. So I was like, wait, what? Wait a minute. And I found joy in it and just started putting out lots and lots of content on YouTube and LinkedIn and a lot of other social medias, specifically about my experiences and companies I get to work with, like Durante, all over the country. So, John?
Excellent. Well, first off, Josh and Elliot, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Yeah.
I'm honored to have been asked. I go back in this from day one of my life. My dad started his company in 1969. And, as a kid, I grew up, you go there on Saturdays, you go there whenever you had days off, and he would allow me to be there. Childhood consisted a lot of just playing on the equipment, really not doing much. But, that then led into, by 12 years old, start knowing what a 60 and 90 pound breaker were and being able to pull generators out and start writing my own tickets. Led me to the parts department, worked for Dad through college, and then when I graduated, came in with my dad and my mom was there as well. And, we continued for years until we did sell to United as well. And it was great for my mom and dad, great for my family. Bad for me as I loved doing what I did. I loved my dad's business, but took me out. Did some small things in between, became a lawyer, opened up a law firm, started buying real estate and stuff like that. Still did magic for charity, as we were talking about last night. And then opened up Durante Rentals about 10 years later with my cousin Anthony and another partner, Chris. And we had that for 10 years, 11 stores, and we had sold that to a private equity. And they've recently just announced that private equity has now sold to Hertz Equipment, or Herc. Equipment.
So your cousin Steven,
Yep.
who got kind of his start in Herc, is now, and then worked for Durante for all these years and was an amazing asset to the company, is now
Yes.
back at Herc.
Yep, amazing.
Goes
Full
around,
circle.
comes around.
Full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah,
Well, he actually got his start with Durante with my dad, and then went full circle to Herc, and then to Durante, and then back to Herc. Yeah, Steve's known as one of the best in the industry.
There you go.
Published with Herc on, book on sales and stuff like that. So
Perfect.
we have a proud lineage in our family of the Durantes. Went upon that, moved to Florida, opened up Durante Equipment, which you guys have been to, and I've been doing that for 5 years. So that's where I'm at right now.
There we go. And Josh, where'd you, because your family lineage is all in rental too.
They are. So my grandfather was in equipment rental. My dad was in equipment rental. I swore I was not going to be in equipment rental. But here I am. Turns out it's a pretty good place to be. Obviously, I owned my own equipment rental company for a number of years. We sold to Sunbelt Rentals in 2018. Spent some time globally in rental software.
4 stores, correct?
4 stores, that's right. And when we moved back to the States, got to join the association as staff, and so now I get to be the ambassador for the industry and have amazing conversations like this. But you all kind of mentioned it. We brought up acquisitions, right?
Oh, good
I
Lord.
think that's a great segue to, what's going on with the independent? Are they going to survive the next 5 years? Are they all going to be gobbled up? It's like every time we turn our heads, somebody crazy is being acquired, and sometimes people you don't even expect. I mean, Rental Max got acquired just a couple weeks ago, had an amazing model out there in Chicago. Where do you guys think that's going?
Well, I'm going to say that I think it's definitely getting harder and harder for the independents every year. The barrier of entry to even get into the business has become so difficult with the cost of renting land, owning land, buying equipment. Some of the tax issues that surround our industry and that are currently changing over the next few years. it's going to make it difficult. I do think if they don't change the bonus depreciation rules, it'll make it harder for some of the mid-sized independents that have really relied on it. Section 179, I don't believe is changing that much, but it's really bonus that is. I think that's going to hurt guys that are in my, in my level of the field. I do think that that some of the smaller areas where land is easier to acquire or easier to rent, I think they have a better chance of surviving and growing. Because you come down to where I am, to get any kind of decent piece of land that you can operate out of, you're looking at about a $4 to $6 million purchase price for the land, or you're looking at about a $60,000 a month rental on just a regular piece of land. That you're like, wow, like to try to start up a rental business or try to open up another location. So I think that's going to prevent independents in certain areas from really being able to grow. I do also believe that some of the people in other areas that are more Midwest or more Northeast America or Middle America, they do have a better opportunity because they can buy land they still buy land for $100,000, $200,000. They're still buying the same equipment. They're getting decent rental rates. And I think a lot of the regulations that are changing make it harder for independents. If the non-competes disappear, I think it's going to make it even harder for independents.
I definitely want to get into non-competes later, but
sure.
I want to push back a little bit because I was actually in the same camp you were until I joined staff at ARA, and I have been blown away. We're record levels of membership, both by company count and by branch count. I'm amazed at the number of rental companies that have come into the industry in the last couple of years. Some of them even without all the expense that you're talking about. I could not believe the companies who started their business on a farm or a piece of property did it all digitally. Started with a mini excavator and a skid steer, which I would have said 5 years ago was not something that you could do in rental, and now have a full rental fleet, but they did it a lot digitally. And that's not everybody, and I agree there's a lot of barriers to entry, but I have been amazed because the market is growing so fast, because rental is growing so fast, because there's no mid-market in rental, it seems to keep growing despite the acquisitions. Because remember, when I say member companies, when one of our larger members buys one of our smaller members, that takes a company out.
Yep.
So realistically, I would have expected that our membership should be decreasing. Branch counts make sense. More branches of rental makes sense. But for the fact that branch counts are going up, acquisitions are going like crazy. We had more members bought by other members last year than the previous 5 years combined.
Oof.
And yet still the number of companies are increasing.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that it is, and I think it's interesting kind of where I see John's coming from and you're coming from, but here's the biggest thing is that if all of the midsize, you just announced that the market movers list just came out.
Yep.
And that the market movers list attracts a lot of attention. It gobbles up a lot. If you end up on the market movers list, you're immediately targeted for acquisition.
No doubt.
So if that's coming about, I get that more members are joining, but is it becoming a big giant rental companies and the little small independents where the majority of them are 4 to 5 locations tops, more rural markets that the big 5 or big 10 rental companies won't even tap into? And then is everything else going to become that it's the big 5 controlling the major markets, your Dallas, your Houston, your Atlanta, your Miamis, your New Yorks, and your Californias? Are those going to be controlled by the big boys? And all the rural markets that there's not as much money to be made, are those going to go all of these small independents? And so you're seeing the numbers go up, but is it the 1%ers and then a ton of everyone else that gets to clean up the mom and pops and the local stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good analysis because there isn't a whole lot of mid-market in the industry. As soon as somebody gets to mid-market, they get acquired in a lot of cases. It's the small independent rental companies that are still the backbone of the industry and the backbone of our membership, and then the larger companies on the other side. And they serve 2 different markets even in a lot of cases, urban, suburban, rural, but they really are much better in that suburban market or the rural markets, to kind of the point that you were saying. But they're still growing and they're still increasing, which continues to amaze me.
And I was referring more to the mid-market guys than I was the smaller rental guys.
Yeah, I have to say real quick on the market movers, though, we have an internal joke that we published the list and we immediately increased the value of these companies. Like, maybe we should take a cut to increase the value. Because you can now, when you get those phone calls from the acquirers in the industry, you can now say, well, I'm one of the fastest growing rental companies in the country. I mean, that's got to be worth a percentage point or two, right?
Well, 2 just sold right after the list came out.
Yeah, I think we had,
immediately after.
in a lot of cases, I think we've had about 25% of the list bought within the first year after being published on there. It's
Wow.
And I get it. Like if I were a buyer in the industry, that would be a hit list. I'm looking at the RER 100 and I'm looking at the market movers and going, do I want to buy big or do I want to buy fast and innovative and growing? And you want a team that's growing. You want a team that's exciting. You want a company that is innovative if you're an acquirer. So it's a perfect list of companies to buy. I hate it, and it's a lot of fun to watch, but it's a perfect list of companies to buy. Rental Max was on the list.
Yeah.
Durante was on the list. Both of them have been acquired in the last few weeks.
And you got to believe that conversations are happening with the other companies that are all sitting in those top 25 positions where people are looking at them, and they're probably having conversations even if we're unaware of it. And if they decide to be bought out or not is up to them, but we got to believe that being on that market movers list, you have attracted a lot of attention.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's unique about that one too is like when you look at the RER 100, if you really look at it, there's a lot of dealers on there. For example, large cat dealers. Those aren't good acquisition targets in the market.
Yeah,
It's those companies that are jumping on to the RER 100 or moving the market, that's why we call it market movers, that are really the attractive acquisitions.
What's crazy is Anthony Durante, my cousin, pointed out to me the other day the value of the RER 100. Like how the value of the total value of revenue that's being produced by them, how much it just goes up every year. To be on that top 100 where you have to be now versus where you had to be 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the market's just growing.
Yep.
But at the same token, costs are growing.
Yes.
You talked about the cost of getting into the industry, and that is a great barrier to entry. For those of us that are in the industry, it's good for us because it helps keep out competition. I used to say you need at least $1 million in fleet to just get started, although I've been proven wrong a number of times over the last couple of years.
But is that changing? And here's the reason why I say that is because everybody saw it. When 2020 and the vid and everything else came in and kind of affected the market, is there wasn't as much projects kicking off. There wasn't as much equipment purchased. Everybody saw that. And kind of 2021 and 2022, we saw an increase in demand, but we saw a decrease in fleet availability. And I think now that the fleet has kind of come back into equilibrium, even maybe too much fleet in the market, I think that maybe it's going to settle back out. Where you said anybody can jump into it. Maybe that was because of the demand, but now companies, where the rental companies held the control, I think the control is slowly sliding back over to the customer as there's plenty of fleet. Even though the demand has not dropped, I think the fleet has kind of come into equilibrium.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One of the reasons that I'd always said you needed a full fleet to get started is because somebody's not going to come to you and rent, just a skid steer or a mini excavator when they can't get the tamper, the cutoffs off from you. So you've got to have a full line to serve at least a smaller mid-sized contractor, maybe not some DIY stuff. But because of the supply chain shortages, it allowed you to hack the system a little bit more than usual because everybody was out of that piece of equipment. So did you have it? And it was okay to go to multiple places because they were already having to do that because they were out of fleet. But fleet's more expensive.
Yep.
As an independent, how are you feeling about that? Where's that going to go for folks?
Don't know. I mean, not feeling really good about it, to be honest. It's, the valuations that we're getting, from when we do our appraisals are not coming in that great on the new stuff that we're buying. So we're still paying high numbers, and then the liquidated value of it is coming in way lower as a percentage than I feel like it used to come in the past, where you get your liquidated value and it was closer to where you were paying. Now, it wasn't dead on, but it was closer to it. That's definitely going to be a hurt. I don't think rates have gone up enough to account for it yet. Yeah. I'm hoping that they do. I do feel that as an independent, we used to be able to buy closer to the big guys. And I knew they were getting a better deal, but I felt we were getting a good deal, close to where they were at, considering the volume that they spent. And I don't feel that way anymore with most manufacturers. And I have several in the industry that I've talked to that feel the same way, that we don't feel like we're getting the right numbers anymore And I think it's going to be a few years before that changes and it gets back to us getting the right numbers for what we're buying.
Yeah, I mean, a fleet's rough, and I think one of the questions that people think about when they think about the increase in fleet and the increase in costs, and they're looking at their balance sheets going up, but their number of units not necessarily going up nearly as fast, is how do you account for that? And then as business starts to slow down, and it is slowing down, not necessarily going negative, but when you're coming off of record levels of utilization, record levels of growth, and you're coming back to what I would call down to earth, back to normal, it feels painful, but it's just back to normal. It makes rates messy, and we can't recommend that rates do anything in particular. We have to be very careful about that as an organization, but it's going to be really interesting to see how disciplined organizations are, especially if you mentioned an oversupply of equipment. If we're oversupplying equipment, rental's a service business. I truly believe that. But there is a supply and demand portion of that business that does affect things. Do you guys think that there's a chance that rates can hold in? Do companies like Rouse and the analytics that we now have, is that going to help companies be more disciplined? Or do you think it's going to continue to get tougher out there?
I am a true proponent, and we've discussed it briefly, but I'm a big proponent of the number one thing that should control kind of where your rates go is utilization. Is if you're sitting there and your utilization is falling, as important as it is to hold the rates as tight as you can, we're in a capital business. The money, you have a choice. And are you going to have the scissor lift sit in your yard and you're going to hold your rate, and I'm just going to throw out just a random rate, it has no bearing, doesn't matter what market, and I'm not going to say the duration, but if you have a scissor lift and you say, I want $700 for it, understood, but if it sits there month after month after month, at what point do you say, you know what, I'll accept $500 for it because it's better it's making some money than no money. And the reason why I say that is I think that some of the scarcity that we all felt during 2021 and 2022 with fleet unavailability is that scarcity made us all kind of have, for lack of a better term, a little bit of a hoarder's mentality of, is that now that I can buy fleet, I'd better do it because I hated that I couldn't get it. I felt like I was letting my customers down. I felt like I was hindering the industry. I felt like I was letting people down. So now that I can buy the fleet, I'm buying it. And I think that we made small errors with maybe buying a little bit too much fleet. And that, see, John's raising his hand here. He's like, yeah. And that little bit, it's not that they massively overpurchased. I think the industry as a whole bought about 10% too much. And when they bought that 10% too much, we actually hindered ourselves. We handicapped ourselves because now there's 10% too much equipment in the market. And I think any of the gains we made in rate based on scarcity is now we're kind of creating it, is we're going to, as an industry, say, I've got fleet sitting, I'm willing to let that rate fall down. The problem is the interest rates, the cost of land, the cost of labor, cost of fuel trucks and everything else all went up. And I think that gap is going to start hurting our industry as a whole. The good news is that they've proven that the majority of major contractors and major construction sites are actually going kind of a little bit away from ownership and going more towards rental. I saw a number the other day, and everybody puts out their own numbers, but it was for the first time in U.S. history, the amount of equipment sold, which was like $27 billion, and the amount of equipment that went into rental fleet and rental dollars was just over that at like $27.5 billion. So for the first time, rental superseded purchases in the American market.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that we had what I would call the toilet paper effect in rental, where everybody bought
I love that.
everything they could get their hands on. But what I think could be different, everybody likes to jump back to 2008, 2009, and the pain that we felt back then. The problem that we had back then, though, was your used equipment was worthless. I mean, that might be a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but you couldn't defleet. So if I'm a rental company and I'm in the situation you talked about with that scissor lift, my only choice isn't to drop rate. I can also sell that piece of equipment. I can defleet. I've got a lot of fleet that I have kept a little bit longer than usual. We've seen average fleet age increase a little bit, and I think we actually have some fleet in a lot of people's hands that's overused compared to normal. Between 2020 and now we've been at record utilization. Well, what does that mean for hours on a machine? It's just like mileage on a car. If it's a 5-year-old car, but it's got 300,000 miles on it, it's a different machine. And I think we've got a lot of equipment like that. And so I think we're at a point now where, yes, we absolutely overbought a little bit, but we have equipment to sell. And if we're measured on being able to defleet some, to miss a couple rentals, to manage our fleet and remix our fleet to match what the needs of the customer are, I don't think we have to go to those places that we went in 2008 and 2009.
True, but the fleet values every month are going down. And to its point, if everybody overbought 10%, I easily overbought. And it was a mistake because the year before I was too scared to buy. And I didn't buy, and then by the time I put my orders in, I had to wait a year for it. So the next year is like, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I made the opposite mistake of buying too much stuff. But if people are defleeting, there is stuff going to auction. But if you have that 10% overage, it also means you have more going to the end user markets trying to get rid of fleet. So that does bring values of the equipment down. It's better than it was in 08, 09, for sure. And I don't even think it's that bad out there yet that this needs to start, but we're already starting to see a race to the bottom by some of the big guys here. And we're getting quotes from our customers. We're looking at it, we're going, come on. And then we have one...
Race to the bottom, meaning you're already starting to see some of the rates come down.
We're already starting to see the rates go down. And things are still good. There's machinery everywhere. There's construction everywhere. And then we have a regional player that's in the area that newer to the area, and their rates are lower than the bottom line of Rouse. And you're sitting there going, okay, I get it. I get the wanting to reduce rates, but to drop it at rock bottom Rouse, to me, makes no sense because now then everybody else looking at it, it's a quick race. But unfortunately, we're in an industry you can do whatever you want. They can do whatever they want. But it's not looking good right now rate-wise, and I don't even think it's started yet. I think it's only going to get worse.
You say that, but Elliot brought it up earlier. We've got an increase in rental penetration, which historically has continued to grow. So that means the market size is growing. We did some contractor research with hundreds of contractors about a year ago, and we've tracked this year over year for a few years now. And it's not contractors who have rented or haven't rented. We're not selecting for that. We're selecting for your average contractor. If you had to guess, when we survey the average contractor, what percentage of contractors do you think expect to rent in the next year?
Oh, I would say almost 100%.
It was 99%.
Yeah.
99% expect to rent in the next year. 47% expected to increase their reliance on rental. And about 50% expected to keep it the same.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, to your credit, I think that as much as it's growing, and I see John's side of it, which is we made gains in rates and we want to hold them. And it's an interesting dichotomy because what we're seeing right now is we're seeing, yeah, the rates are going to come down, which is terrible. Nobody wants to see it because we fought so hard to gain it. There's nothing worse than the piece of equipment that we bought in 2019. And I'll just say, generically, a 19-foot scissor because it's the most common equipment in our market. People saw those right around $9,000. That exact same piece of equipment now is going for $12,000. That's a 30% increase. Mm-hmm. The problem is that our rates did not increase by 30%.
Yep.
And so the problem that we're finding is now these business owners like John, like everyone who's a member of the ARA, is they're starting to see those gaps, are tightening up their margins and really nipping them in the butt. And if I had to think is even though the market's getting bigger, and here's a kind of an interesting problem to solve, the market is getting bigger with the fact that more companies are renting. They want to free up their capital. 2020 actually taught a majority of us that if the market stops and you have rental, you just return it. You don't have all your money tied up.
True.
You don't have all your capital tied up in an asset that sat in your yard for 9 months waiting for the economy to come back. So people realize that rental helps their businesses be more flexible. So even though the market's growing, it's becoming more competitive because of all of the factors that are pricing in. I think as an industry as a whole, and I know we can't, price match or whatever, but there comes a point where do you fight with the person who's the low price leader, or do you let them say, you know what, you're going to have a higher utilization than us that's terrible, but maybe you'll use up all your fleet getting bad rates.
Yeah.
But when somebody's trying to gain market share like John is, it's a definite kicker because you're trying to grow and you're trying to do it honestly and respectively, and then you see somebody who comes in and they don't have the skills and relationship, so their number one thing they're selling is, we're cheap.
Yeah.
And on the flip though, I feel like, you said like you were kind of disagreeing with what I was saying. I almost feel like you were agreeing with what I was saying. What I was saying was there's equipment everywhere. There's equipment everywhere. You go to every job site, there's equipment everywhere. And yet rates are in a rush to the bottom right now.
Yeah.
The data, the data supports that there's equipment rental. There's a lot of equipment rental. We're in a race to the bottom in my market. And I'm only in one small market in the entire ecosystem of America. But that is what we are seeing right now.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is interesting when we look at increase in cost of equipment and the new fleet that's coming in being, 30% is a number that's thrown around a lot more than it used to be the last time we purchased that, is that a rental company doesn't have to shoulder their entire fleet being 30% more expensive that year. You're really only buying about 1/7 of your inventory every year. So if equipment is 30% more expensive today, then it takes 7 years for your fleet to be 30% more expensive. So we have time. In the last few years, equipment has been a lot more expensive. So we're, let's say, 2 or 3 years into that. But your whole fleet isn't there yet. So as long as we're measured throughout the rest of the cycle, I think we do have the ability through operational efficiency and a number of things that we can do. And that's another place that I'd be really kind of curious your guys' opinions. I know from my own personal experience, when time's great and utilization is high, you can cover up a lot of mistakes. You start to buy things and do things and have people on staff that you don't necessarily need. You create a lot of waste. And we actually found in some cases that these times were really times where you started to build your highest profitability because you got back to the basics and you started focusing on strategy, you improved your operations. And I think we've gotten a little bit fat and happy over the last couple of years. You just had to show up.
Absolutely. Phenomenal comment. One of my mentors, and I love the things that he teaches me. And he told me one day, he owns a number of really large, multi-million-dollar businesses. And he told me one day, he goes, Elliot, let me tell you something. He goes, businesses don't fail during bad times. And I looked at him all weird. He goes, listen, it's the mistakes they made in the big times. They overpurchased, they overspent, they overstretched their assets. He goes, they acted like the sky would never slow down. He goes, they were like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They were just giving it away now. They were buying things they didn't need. And all of a sudden they stretched their money to levels where they assumed that they could never lose. And then the second things tightened up, they didn't have the habits and the discipline to succeed. So I think you're exactly right, Josh. I think that now that things are getting a little more aggressive, here's the thing. Companies are starting to realize we need to have better relationships with our customers. We need to be more attentive. We need to look at better technologies like you just alluded to. We need to run our businesses tighter, where we don't have trucks sitting 24 hours a day. We don't have spare trucks. We need to tighten up the way we do business so that when the money comes back around again, or it just keeps going at the same pace, we run a tighter, more efficient business, and it doesn't matter what the economy does.
Yeah.
Could I add, it's not just the cost of the equipment that has gone up, which I do agree with you, the 7-year cycle, 5-year cycle, however a company runs, it's everything else that's gone up. And one thing I point to all the time is that we used to negotiate, let's say, $1 million or $2 million, $3 million supply contract with a supplier, and we would negotiate either free freight or we would negotiate a $2,000 freight bill for the entire order, $3,000, whatever it was, but it was never more than $3,000. Now we are negotiating, we pay freight, no free freight, and you're paying $3,000 to $3,500 a truck. So now your rate went up 30% to buy the equipment, but now your incoming to get it in, it costs you 30, 40 grand more than it cost you before. I am doing, every now and then we send stuff for outside repair. I never had a repair bill in my life more than $10,000 ever, and that was the exception. Or I take a machine, send it to somebody, say, I need a repair. I can't tell you how many $12,000 to $30,000 repair bills I have had in the past 2 years.
What are you doing to your fleet, John? Good Lord.
Right, and it's not just me. Like literally, and we're using multiple people. We're trying different things. And one guy was a $12,000 bill, and I'm like, you need to itemize that for me. Like, what am I paying per hour? And the guy's like, that's what I'm charging you. It was major welding work. The guy did a great job. Traditionally, it was a $4,000 or $5,000 bill. The guy's like, that's my cost. It's 12 grand.
Wow.
Good luck finding somebody else and that can do it for you. And you sit there and say, shit, what what do you do?
So let's think of some other ways that maybe we could tackle that problem. The ARA Show floor on the equipment side sold out faster than it's ever sold out.
Congratulations.
For Vegas next year. Thank you.
That's really cool.
It's an exciting problem to have, but we want all those people there. And you're seeing vendors get bigger booths, and you're seeing more vendors than ever. You're seeing vendors that weren't here 5 years. And
Can I interrupt you and ask something about that?
Yeah, totally.
Do you think that it sold faster because they're seeing now 2022 and 2023, everybody needed fleet, so the floodgates were open. You didn't need to go out and advertise. The business was coming in. Now all of a sudden they're realizing that people fleeted up, like John, and he's not going to the show saying, I need to spend money, so they're realizing they need to spend money to attract more business. Do you think 100%. That's the case?
That's part of the case, and the fact that the retail buyer of equipment for all these manufacturers is slowing down with high interest rates, uncertainty. So the rental market is a place where people are buying. So the question there is, do you think that maybe we'll see the return of more show specials, the free freight, the discounts from major manufacturers, or all of these newer suppliers that have been very successful overseas that have now shown they're going to be here for years and have been here for years now over the last couple of years and now have SKUs with many of you because you had to buy something and they had availability, and now you're starting to get comfortable with those. They seem to be a better price point in some cases. Do you think either of those influences can help with fleet costs?
I mean, it's going to be supply and demand. They're definitely not selling what they've sold before. In the past 6 months to a year, we've seen a lot of not pricing come down necessarily. I mean, some pricing come down, where they did away with some of their steel surcharges and stuff like that at least a year and a half ago. What we are seeing now is more secondary benefit that had disappeared, where they're holding financing longer, they're offering better financing, they're offering longer floor plan, which is the first step, and then the second step is going to be the prices coming down. We've definitely seen a difference in the past year of, we put in some orders at the show and like, it's going to be 9 months out to a year. I'm like, all right, we got to order it anyway. And then like 3 weeks later, stuff was showing up. Right, what happened to 9 months? When they were saying 9 months to a year, 3 years ago, it was 12 months to 14 months, So, things have definitely changed.
Yeah. I love hearing that there's that activity. I think that you're exactly right. I actually think there's going to be a big change in the market. And I realize, coming from my background and, I love American-made products, is I think that with the increase in manufacturing costs, the increase of fleet costs, John alluded to it, less show deals, that as these costs go up, business owners, because we're not getting a tremendously better rate to offset it, I think some of these overseas products, if they're willing to come in and offer up the right service, the right parts access, the right training to teach you about their new products, they may make a big chunk and start dipping into some of the rental guys that are saying, hey, if I have to spend $12,000 on this unit and I can get it from someplace overseas, even if it's not a common product, my customers don't care if it's green, blue, yellow, red, orange, or pink. The best thing they want is a quality piece of equipment. And if I can get it for not $12,000, but $10,000 from somebody making it overseas, I need to look at that, because that could help me offset some of my margins with the increased interest rates, the increased shipping costs, the increased repair costs. I got to make margins somewhere, and you can speak on it, John, whether or not we need to start looking at, do I diversify my fleet, even though there's costs associated with that? Is that the solution of how to make my margins?
Yeah, and the contractor research shows that. They show that contractors need high quality equipment that does the job that it's expected to do, but brand loyalty is not something that you see from a rental customer. The brand loyalty is to the rental company, not necessarily the color of the equipment that you mentioned. And I think that really impacts things. It's just like car rental, right? You get a mid-sized sedan. You're not asking whether, is it a Chevy Malibu or a Ford Focus? You're like, I need a mid-sized sedan. I need an excavator. I need a scissor lift that takes me 19 feet. And so if there's other opportunities to be more efficient with your purchasing and go after vendors with high quality equipment, as long as the dealer support is there, the part support is there, I think that's an opportunity.
It's a great analogy on the car rental. I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
You don't care.
Yeah, you don't.
Never thought of that.
You don't.